Normally, I like to focus on the big picture, but sometimes we have to focus on individual words. Why? Because you can't make a perfect translation. It's impossible. This is why seminaries used to require that the pastors learn the original languages like Greek and Hebrew. Unfortunately, a lot of times they don't do that anymore. That's, in my opinion, a mistake. So why can't you make a perfect translation? Well, the first reason is sometimes the meaning of the word just isn't clear. Let's take the English word green. I can say she was green. What does that mean? Well, if she just started a job, that means she's a newbie. If she's on a deep fishing boat, that means she's seasick. If she sees her boyfriend with another girl, that means she's jealous. If she was painting the house, that means she probably got colored green. Now, normally we can pick this up by looking at the context. If she's on a deep sea fishing boat, we know she's seasick. Sometimes it isn't clear. Sometimes we have to guess. In this lesson, I'm going to cover an example of that, where I think most of the translations got it wrong, and I'll explain to you why I think they got it wrong. Okay, another reason. When cultures are very different, sometimes you just can't translate a word. Let's take the Eskimos. Let's say they have 16 words for ice. They deal with ice all the time, so their language carries very subtle differences between the different kinds of ice. In English, we have one word for ice. So let's say you take a book that was written in the Eskimo language and you try to translate it to English. They used Eskimo word for ice number 5. We have to translate that to ice. Well, their 5 is not quite like their word 4 or their word 3 or their word 1. So you translate that into ice, you actually lose meaning. Let's go the other way. Let's say we take an English book with the word ice and we translate that into Eskimo. We have to choose one of the 16 words, which means we're actually adding meaning that isn't there. Not good. Let's give you another case. Let's say that you take a book that talks about snow and you go deep into the heart of the Amazon to a tribe that doesn't have radio, doesn't have TV. Now, you cannot use pictures because we're talking about translation here, and you cannot describe this in a couple paragraphs. You have to describe it in a word or two. How do you translate the word snow to that Amazon tribe in 1 or 2 words without pictures? You can't. You just can't do it. Now, there's a third thing that most people are not aware of. A lot of the words in the Bible are not translated. Ooh. There's 2 reasons for this. Sometimes we just don't know what the word means. An example of that would be in the King James when they talk about what the Noah's Ark was made out of. They say gopher word. What they did is they took each Hebrew letter and translated it into the equivalent English letter. Well, why did they do that? Because we don't know what kind of wood it was. Picture the situation. Somebody writes a story about Newton's apple, how the apple fell on his head and he had all these great ideas. The guy that did that moves to the Amazon. Again, why not? He passes his book about Newton's apple to his son, and his son passes it to his grandson. Now, there are no apple trees in the Amazon. So his son, who has never seen an apple tree, and the grandson, who has never seen an apple tree, if you take them, say to the United States, put them in front of an apple tree, they won't know that's an apple tree. After a couple of generations, they have no idea what kind of tree it was that had a fruit that fell on Newton's head. The meaning is totally lost. This is what happened to the flood. We don't know what kind of wood it was. It kind of irritates me with some of the modern translations like the NIV. The NIV, instead of doing what the King James did, actually says it was cypress. Why do they say it was cypress? Because that's the kind of tree that was growing around Israel. Ooh. If it was a universal flood, then the tree could have been from anywhere. So they're kind of making an assumption that it was a local flood, which is kind of irritating. What's another reason that they don't translate the words into English? Well, when the King James was written, King James set up a bunch of rules that the translators had to follow. One of the rules was, you will not translate these words into English. So they took each letter and translated it into English, but not the word. We're going to talk about one of those words today. Apostle. That's the word they didn't translate, or at least one of the words they didn't translate. But we know what it means, don't we? Those were the 12 closest companions to Jesus, the apostles. Well, and Paul, because he says he's an apostle. Wait a minute. Barnabas? Barnabas was an apostle too? So we had the 12, and then Paul, and now Barnabas? Wait a minute. Oh, this can't be right. Jesus was an apostle? So we had the 12, and Paul, and Barnabas? Jesus? Okay, maybe we don't understand this. Okay, so what does the word mean? When a king would send a new governor to a district, the governor was called an apostle of the king. He had the full authority of the king. When they would send a trading ship out to the empire, the ship had to have a letter of authorization. That meant that they had the right to actually sell the goods and set the prices. So, what we have here is an ambassador means that they have the authority to represent the one that sent them. Now, I've heard that a good translation of that is the word ambassador, and I think that's kind of close. What I don't like about the word ambassador, in the United States, we tend to think of that as, oh, you're going to be an ambassador for something, therefore you have to make a good impression. Well, as in, you need to be a good ambassador. That's not really what it's about. If we picture the ambassador with the right to make treaties and agreements, now we're getting really close. Because the ambassador has the authority to represent the one that sent them out. So what Paul is saying here is, I'm going to defend my gospel. But you need to bear in mind that God sent me out as his representative. So when you argue with me, then you're really arguing with God. We didn't get as far as I wanted, but let's summarize. An apostle is one that is sent by another and has his full authority to make decisions, binding decisions. So the 12 were apostles because they were sent by Jesus and given the authority to represent him. Jesus was an apostle because he was sent by God the Father and given the Father's full authority to represent him. Paul was claiming to be an apostle because he was sent by Jesus and given Jesus' full authority